The Rambam records a strange halacha with regard to the obligation of Kriyat HaMegillah. The Rambam writes in Perek Bet Halacha Zayin, Hakarei et HaMegillah v'ta'a b'kriyata v'kara kriya meshubeshet yatsa. Person reads the Megillah, makes a mistake, and the reading is all garbled. Nevertheless, that person has been yotzei the mitzvah of Kriyat HaMegillah, lefi she'ein medakdekin b'kriyata, because we're not so careful in particular with regard to the reading of the Megillah. Now, the Rambam's halacha is based on a Yerushalmi, in which describes two of the Talmidim of Rav sitting before him and reading the Megillah, one reading the word as Yehudim and the other as Yehudiim, and Rav corrected neither one. Now, when most of the poskim get a hold of this Rambam and it's codified lahalacha, take a look in the Shulchan Aruch and Arach Chaim, Siman Tafresh Tzadi Seif Yud Dalid. The general consensus is that we're only speaking about mistakes that might change the meaning of the pasuk. But a word, a mispronunciation, a misreading that would change the actual meaning of the pasuk, then the person would not be yotzei, and we are generally machmir with regard to this and insist on a proper reading. But a reading of the Rambam, and the simple reading of the Rambam, she'ein medakdekin b'kriyata, means that a reading could be full of mistakes and one would still be yotzei. It's a rather strange halacha, and I'd like to understand that with you. Furthermore, when the Mishnah on Daf Yudchet Amud Aleph in Masechet Megillah speaks about the language in which the Megillah has to be read, or can be read, the Mishnah tells us, amongst other things, Halo Eis Sheshama Ashurit Yatsa, that generally you have to hear it in Hebrew, and you can't read it in Targum, that a person, however, who speaks in a foreign language, and the Megillah is written and read in that foreign language, that person would be yotzei the mitzvah. However, a person who is not a Hebrew speaker and yet hears the Megillah only in Hebrew and understands not one word, nevertheless is yotzei the mitzvah of Kriyat HaMegillah. And the question, of course, is how could this be the case? I mean, after all, if the purpose is Pirsumei Nisa, the purpose is to share the story and tell the story, then what's going on here? The person understands nothing. And so the Gemara answers on Yudchet Amud Aleph, V'halo yada mai ka'amre, the Lo'ez doesn't understand what's being read. And the Gemara answers, Mididahave anashim va'amei ha'aretz. It's no different than those people who otherwise don't understand the Hebrew anyway. So makif la ravina atu anana chashtarnim be'menei ramachim miyadinan. Even if we do understand Hebrew, there are words and phrases that have no translation, that we don't understand, and nevertheless we're still yotzei the mitzvah of kriya. Gemara answers, Ele mitzvat kriya or Pirsumei Nisa, hachanami mitzvat kriya or Pirsumei Nisa. Just like there, when we don't understand words like achash tarnaim b'nei haramachim, and nevertheless we're yotzei, because the mitzvah of kriya is really a mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa, so too in the case of the Lo'ez, a reading, which is a reading of Pirsumei Nisa, one would fulfill one's obligation even without understanding the words. Now, in order to understand the answer of the Gemara, I'd like to take a step back and understand the nature of Pirsumei Nisa itself. We know that there are three instances in which one fulfills this mandate of Pirsumei Nisa: Ner Chanukah, Daled Kosot, and Kriyat HaMegillah. Now, as they say on Sesame Street, if those who remember, one of these things just doesn't belong. Ner Chanukah and Daled Kosot are similar in that they are merely symbolic actions, the lighting of candles or the drinking of 4 cups of wine, but there's nothing intrinsic about them that if a person observes them being fulfilled, that would know anything about the miracle. Kriyat HaMegillah seems to be different. After all, that is telling the story, and that one would seemingly understand and would know what the Nes Purim is through the reading. So in order to actually understand this a little bit better, let's take a look at the comment made by the Or Zarua. The Or Zarua on our Gemara, in explaining why it is that a person is Yotzei even though he does not understand Chashtarnim B'nei Aramachim. So the Or Zarua explains that if a person hears words that are misunderstood, that are not understood, or hears an entire Kriya in Hebrew, in which he does not understand even one thing that is being said or being read, Af al pi she'inan yod'im ma sheshom'in, even if they don't understand what they are hearing, shoalin et hayodim, v'yomrim ma hi hakriya hazo, ve'ech haya hanes umodi'im lahem. That even if they don't understand one word of the reading itself, but they'll turn to the person next to them, they'll approach somebody else and say, what's going on here? And that person will then explain what the story of the Megillah, what the Nisa of Purim is really all about. Essentially then, all three cases of Pirsumei Nisa, Ner Chanukah, Daled Kosot, and Kriyat HaMegillah, are not, the Pirsumei Nisa is not achieved in the act of the lighting or the act of the drinking or even the act of the reading of the Megillah, but rather the Pirsumei Nisa is achieved when those acts serve as a stimulus to talk about the miracle and to elaborate on all the Nisim v'Niflaot that occurred to Bnei Yisrael by Yamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh. So although the acts themselves are essential, part of the mitzvah Hayom, the lighting of the candles, the drinking of the wine, the reading of the Megillah, but they're really only a stimulus to the discussion, the further discussion of what those miracles happen to be. And therefore, according to the Rambam, ein medaktekin b'kriyata, we're not so particular about the reading of the Megillah, because after all, it's not the reading that is the Pirsumei Nisa, it's the mitzvah, and in fact there was a kriya, even though it was a kriya mishubeshet, but it's the discussion which is the actual Pirsumei Nisa taking place, and that explains why a lo'ez that hears it only in Asherit, only in Hebrew, fulfills his obligation as well. And the truth is, even if we would understand every single word of the Megillah, we wouldn't necessarily understand the Nes. After all, Hashem's name is not in the Megillah. One could read the Igeret, the story of the and the account of the Megillah in ways that are not miraculous. And therefore, it is our response to the reading, which uncovers the many layers and the many depths of the Yad Hashem that appeared at that particular time. And therefore, Pirsumei Nisa then is a mitzvah which enables us to share our voices and to find our voices. It came to Mitzrayim at the time of slavery. Ve'yanchu, the best that Bnei Yisrael could do was to groan and to moan and to shout in wordless ways. The Zohar points out that the word Pesach is really the two words of Pesach, that the mouth speaks, and our response to being unable to articulate our needs when we were slaves is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, of Pirsumei Nisa, of the Daled Kosot, Pesach, v'kol hamarba harezeh meshubach. Chanukah, when our Torah was meant to be silenced by the Assyrian Greeks, our response is to teach about Torah, to talk about Torah, to talk about the Nisim, the Niflaot that took place. And Purim, in which we had no choice but to hide who we were and what we were, to hide our Jewishness, in which we were in a state of im acharesh tacharishi, of being silent in terms of advocating for Jewish destiny and Jewish survival. The tikkun is Pirsumei Nisa, to read the Megillah, but furthermore to talk about it and to elaborate upon it and to unlayer the many levels and the many layers of the Nisim that took place through the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And therefore, Pirsumei Nisa teaches us that in every language, in every dialect, in every accent, we need to speak out for the Jewish future and for Jewish destiny. Chag Sameach.